My name is Alicia. I am a survivor of domestic violence and I want to share my story. I want to start by saying everything that I'm doing currently is under duress. My heart races 24/7 because I have been put into such an extreme state of fear. I have a beautiful home, I'm a loving mother, I do good work, but for the last 10.5 years, I've been getting attacked. Prior to that, I was a scholar in school. I had 3.75 GPA. I ran track for 8 years. I was on student government for 6 years. I was on the prom court and homecoming court for 2 years and was a girl state attendee. 10.5 years ago, I was a single mother of two really awesome boys who were 3 and 5 years old at the time. I became an activist because they were saying my boys as black males were at risk. I'm a very passionate mother, and with this information went into the mindset to do whatever I could to make life better for them. I met Elijah in 2009 at a rally for jobs during the jobs crisis. We started a community group together along with others, and about 5 months later, we had our first kiss. He was living with his sister, Crystal Vic, at the time, and that night we were in his room listening to records. I ended up falling asleep there, and in the middle of the night, she walked into his room without knocking, asking for a cigarette. He told her he didn't have one and to get out. The next morning, she called me. I have no idea how she got my number, and she called me, and I quote, a fake Erykah Badu. I can recall feeling different because no one has ever blatantly shown their dislike for me as she had. I ignored her, and the games persisted throughout the relationship. In February 2011, we had our daughter. In April of 2011, we got married. Sometime in early 2012 was the first time he became physical with me. He picked me up by my neck and body slammed me into our daughter's playpen because I said I would post about him on Facebook. He did this while the kid's teacher was outside to pick them up for school. I told the teacher, and he stayed there until my cousin got there, and I left with her. I think I was pregnant at this time. It was a hard decision to forgive him when he requested. The children were in school, and we had an established life. It could have been a week, but I eventually forgave him. He was already lying about trivial things, and this was constant conversation because it was starting to interfere with our progress. Acts of physical violence were spread out, and I was pro family. Around this time, he became verbally abusive and generally uncaring about feelings. At one point, he slapped the Bible out of my hand, and at another point, he expressed that he did not have a soul in front of the children. In April of 2012, we were in a head-on collision that was very traumatizing to our family. Between 2012 and 2016, he also pushed me and our newborn off the bed. He pushed me into a closet door so hard I was sure my pelvis was fractured because I was pregnant and so scared that when I gave birth to the baby, that the baby coming through would cause it to fully break. He locked me outside in the cold, half naked, being kicked out with his feet. I remember those green-looking toenails, and I was thinking to myself, how did I get there so low? Between these instances were some good times, mainly relating to the beauty of the children and to the business we started that I had pushed us into, and the maintaining of our office space out of historic Golden Belt in Durham, North Carolina. That part was beautiful and was meant to grow, absent the lies and abuse. For better or worse, I gave every effort to help him heal from his childhood trauma. At one point in time, in maybe 2015, his sister Crystal lived with us, and she was not doing well. She sat on her porch talking to herself and throwing back salt from a glass salt shaker. At one time, she left open Clorox in the bottom cabinet in the kitchen, and our kids drank some, and we had to call an ambulance to take him to the hospital. At this time, she also intentionally poured an entire glass of wine into my computer that she had asked to use. We were able to get her committed to a psychiatric hospital where she stayed for 3 months, and she came back to Stillwater after her release. Things were continuing to deteriorate between Elijah and I, and in June of 2016, I fled after he punched our bathroom door clearly in half while I was inside. While he was doing this, he was so angry that he was speaking what sounded like Russian, and I didn't know he knew Russian after all that time. Soon after, I fled. He had already sabotaged my family relationship, so I went with some people who I'd recently met. It was a large group of very sweet people who agreed to protect me, who could have been construed as a gang, but they didn't have weapons. I stayed with one of them who lived with his older brothers not far from the house for 2 days, but when Elijah found me via Gmail location services, he came over there banging on the door and he fought the guy, so I had to leave. With nowhere to go, I went back to the house with the children. The next day, I was on the phone doing damage control from the prior day, and he took my phone out of my hand and threw it onto the sidewalk, smashing it into a million pieces. Then he picked up our kid's tricycle and threw it at me with all of his might, and it barely missed me by a hair. I could have died. Our daughter, who was 3 at the time, ran to the neighbor screaming, "It's a monster, it's a monster." He caught up with her, and she immediately, out of her own protection, turned nice and said, "Oh, hey, Daddy." That night, he threatened to kill me, and I was able to get out and make it to the next door neighbor's house, Miss Faye. He came knocking on the door, but she didn't let him in. We called the police, and he was charged with communicating threats. He was advised to leave the house, and I had those new friends over as much as possible because I didn't know when he'd return. One evening, after sitting on the porch for a while with them, they were getting into their car, and Elijah pulled up in a cab. He immediately jumped out, chasing them around, trying to fight them. He then picked up that same tricycle and threw it into their windshield, and then he jumped onto their windshield and smashed it in, jumping on it with both feet. They sped away, leaving me there alone with him. The cab driver was still there. I begged him to take me up the street, but he refused. Elijah then picked me up by my neck and slammed me onto the ground. I was on the phone with my mother, and she called the police. He fled, but a warrant was issued for his arrest for assault on a female. I had to pay $400 to repair their windshield. He was arrested at some point within the next week. The friends were still consistently there because he could bond out at any time. The jail said they would call me, but they didn't. Maybe a week later, one of those friends tried to take advantage of me. He was forcing himself onto me, and at that exact moment, Elijah kicked down the bedroom door. He immediately started fighting erratically. The next thing I knew, I was waking up off the floor of the room with blood pouring down my mouth. I could feel my teeth were pushed back into my mouth. I was alone in the room. I went out into the hall, and he was running around in the house. The children came out of their room, and my oldest son called 911. He had done this immediately from getting out of jail for a prior assault on me. The children went to the neighbor, Miss Faye's house, and I went to the hospital in an ambulance. A plastic surgeon was thankfully able to reposition my 4 bottom teeth, but one was missing and knocked out. And I had a lot of stitches, and my lip was extremely huge. They changed my name for my safety, and I stayed there for 4 days. Afterward, I went to a DV shelter, or domestic violence shelter. The children were with my grandparents, but he took the 3 smallest from there and went to the state of Washington. He had them until October of 2016 when I begged him to come bring them back. At some point, we had the hearing on his charge, and he had directed me to tell them to reduce it to a misdemeanor, so I did. He was given a supervised probation. He kept trying to meet, and I said I wasn't comfortable with that. Again, he found me with Gmail location and kidnapped me. I was exhausted. He drove about 30 minutes out into Hillsboro, and I said I had to go to the bathroom. He stopped at a store and stood outside the bathroom door because he said I might try to run. He then drove me to some woods, and I begged him not to kill me. He turned around and took me to where the children were being held, and I wanted to be with them. He got his friend's parents to rent a van for him, and he drove us back to Washington. In Washington, he dragged me into the basement by my legs regularly and sat me on the washing machine and degraded me. He made me strip and work to put me in a mindset to do what he said. One day while the children were at daycare, he strangled me, saying he would kill me. I was able to get to the police station by convincing him to let me rest while he went and picked up the children. As soon as he left, I ran to the police station that was around the corner. They took me back over there and he was arrested. He was advised to stay away, but one night he tricked me into opening the door, saying he was far away, and he left something on the porch for me. After a while, I opened the door, and he lunged into the house. A few days later, the children and I were able to get into a shelter for a few days, and then we flew back to North Carolina. I was pregnant with my 3-year-old daughter at the time. In North Carolina, the children and I got an apartment through the domestic violence service. I didn't know at this time that no contact was the only way to stop this type of abuse, so I was still talking to him on the phone and letting him talk to the children. When I was about to give birth in July 2017, I was so scared, and I said he could take our 2 boys, who were almost 3 and 5. I made the mistake of giving him the address, and he ended up taking our daughter too. He picked her up for a hug, and he just walked out the door and drove to the other side of the country. Up until now, I had not cried so hard before as when I was driving around looking for them. A couple of weeks later, he put forth that he would bring them back if I got back with him. He drove back and moved in. This was around June of 2017. Our daughter was born in July. We moved to Durham around November of 2017 in a nice house in a beautiful neighborhood. This is the first time he was being seen by his probation officer for the 2016 assault, having left the state for most of the rest of the time. I could now call her if anything happened. There was always ever-increasing verbal abuse and degradation and chaos. In August 2018, I let the house go, and the children and I moved in with my grandparents. Elijah and I had broken it off. At this point, I still wasn't aware of no contact being the only way to stop it, and 2 months later, he convinced me to go to Oklahoma with him to escape Hurricane Florence. I went, and my 2 teenagers didn't want to go. My mother told them they could stay with her outside of my consent. While here in Oklahoma, his cousin wanted to allow us to take over their lease in a very big, beautiful house where the rent was $200 less than the lease we had just gotten out of in North Carolina, so we stayed. Around this time, he had a job in Atlanta, and I booked the flight wrong, so we had to drive. He was upset about me booking wrong, and he punched me while I sat in the passenger seat with the kids in the back. We pulled over at a park, and I called the police, but he put us into the car and sped off before the police could get there. He did much apologizing between there and our destination. We lived in Oklahoma from October 2018 to June of 2020. During that time is when I learned about narcissism and emotional abuse. I studied, and I prepared to get the children and me out of there. He got the opportunity to open a coffee shop, and I funded it. I paid the first month's rent and deposit, bought his hot water heater, sink, utensils, and coffee maker because I recognized that would hold him in Oklahoma when we fled. One day in June, we were supposed to be going camping. He did what he always did. When it was something fun for everyone, he ruined it. We were all in the car, talking and excited, so he said he wasn't going. He did this often. The last time he did it was when we were leaving for North Carolina the month before for a trike getting my sons. After we had driven an hour into a 19-hour drive, he decided he wasn't going, and we had to drive an hour back to the house to take him back. Then, when we got there, he decided he was going. On the day of camping was when I realized he would never, ever change. I also recognized at that point that I had done every possible thing I could do to try to help him, and I could confidently say I gave it my all. I took the opportunity to leave because when you flee domestic violence, when the opportunity presents itself, you take it. We were blessed to be able to stay in a 4-star hotels the entire time. Many women and children fleeing domestic violence become homeless. God was on our side. A couple of months in hotels in Oklahoma, and we went to North Carolina to continue the struggle for my older sons. We got the opportunity to purchase a beautiful property, and we did for a great price. Around this time, my partner, Mr. Hunter, came into the picture, and there was no way I could turn he and his mother away. They provided love and protection and overall good energy. I got rid of my trackable phones and bought a $30 one from Dollar General, never turning on location. On our property, we homesteaded, every day working to clear the land and heal, finally enjoying the very slow, everyday healing of going no contact. The children have been so affected, and we're finally beginning to see that life is not everyday drama. We talked, cooked together on the fire, explored our property, loved on each other, and healed. Mr. Hunter and his son were there with us, and they also had a long struggle with domestic violence from his son's mother. She was extremely abusive to him. His father fought for 7 years, making DHS reports. Finally, he was taken out when she broke his ribs. She later tried to stab him after she had lost custody. We all understood that we were healing, and it was a slow process. In October, my 16-year-old came back on his own. He started boxing every day, going to the gym, getting props, preparing for his first fight. On November 30th, I got my 14-year-old back using law enforcement. I had not talked to my mother for 2 years since she had my children. She had trespassed me from her house, and I didn't see them the entire time that they were there. So on November 30th, I was able to use law enforcement to let her know that she did not have custody. She's not their parent. My son was a minor, and he let her know that she had to turn him over to me. I had all of my children together for the first time because I have a 1-year-old. They hadn't been together before. This was a really awesome time. That night, we all drove to Walmart, and my 16-year-old played. He was driving. He had his permit, and he played Akon song. Nobody wants to see us together, but it don't matter, no, 'cause I got you. And we all sang that, and it was so beautiful, and it was a really great feeling. I'd say she immediately, once I got my son, called CPS and made allegations about us at a place where she had never been. She manipulated them pretty good. They came the first time at 10 p.m. at night with 10 officers demanding to see the children. I didn't let them trespass because I wanted a hearing relating to what I had been through. I knew it was Juanita, but the workers were being so terrible to us. She didn't want to hear it. She wouldn't allow us to counsel with our attorney. She was being so terribly rude, we didn't allow her to trespass. 2 other workers came the next day with 20 county sheriffs and police in full force. They forced their way onto the property with M16 assault rifles and immediately arrested Mr. Hunter with a charge of resisting arrest and took him away. They then came to the children and me, and I was reading the statute to the workers, and they were refusing to follow it. They took all the children without a warrant, bypassed my placement for them. They didn't even call her, forged the paperwork, and took them all to my mother. They even took Todd's son and lied on their paperwork saying that she was his maternal grandmother, because when they got there, they weren't expecting him to be there because she didn't know about him at the time. So they had to make something up in order to be able to take him to her, as they had already planned to take the rest of the children. They said it was because of our cabin, but if they'd taken them to my placement, we could have been together. Instead, they tried to set up 1 hour a week of visitation with Juanita. The worker said if we act right, Juanita was willing to continue the visitations. We had to wait 7 days to be heard, over which time I found text messages that were occurring between Elijah and Juanita, with her getting money from him and talking about him seeing the children. At the hearing, Judge Bartholomew dissolved the fake order, and after court, as stated by worker David Grant, he said that it was a race to get the kids. He said that they were planning to return the children to us, but Elijah took them. I thought it was so disgusting because Juanita, my mother, took my kids because supposedly of his domestic violence. But then, after the court hearing, she gave the kids to him, and he came immediately to Oklahoma. I had no choice except to come. His girlfriend was neglecting the children. They were all sick with no proper clothes in a snowstorm. I found out my 9-year-old was taken to the state of Washington with Elijah's sister, and whatever story he told her about me caused her not to talk to me. She had my daughter for 3 weeks, and I didn't talk to her once. I got emergency custody in Oklahoma County, but didn't mention the North Carolina CPS kidnapping in my petition. I focused on the current neglect from his girlfriend, of which I have video evidence. I flew to Washington and got a habeas corpus for my daughter. Flew back 2 days later, which was the show cause hearing. This 2 days was the longest that I've had all of my children together. At the show cause hearing, the Oklahoma County judge didn't like that I didn't mention the North Carolina CPS kidnapping. She gave him temporary custody pending a DHS Oklahoma County investigation. I showed her his convictions of assault on me. She said that meant nothing. There was a lot of ex parte communication going on between the judge and DHS during this time. The protective order judge told me that I could dissolve the case, and I did, and the judge entered the minute acknowledging the dismissal. January 4th, the day he got temporary custody, he came with the police. He found our hotel somehow, and he came with the police to take the children, and we noticed that he had slashed all 4 of our car tires. At that time, the police said basically that he admitted to doing it. He then took the children along with his girlfriend, and they left. After this, I sent the children's school curriculum to his girlfriend. She immediately kicked them out the next day, and he moved to Payne County with his sister Crystal. This is where the children are now. They both severed communication, and I have seen my babies only once in the last 179 days. I also only talked to them sporadically on the phone and have not heard their voices at all since June 13th, and today is July 1st. They love me so much, and they shouldn't have to be punished for this. I was able to get some of the children from him for brief periods, but this judge returned them all to him with his attorney's help. I have a protective order against him, and she has me with 2 hours per week of supervised visitation, supervised by him at his discretion. He doesn't bring them to visitation. The idea of the abuse continuing when we had escaped and with the help of the state is terrifying. There was a big issue with Crystal hitting the children. I have since found out from a news article that she is charged with felony biting police officers, where she was hanging out at McDonald's where she used to work, and the staff called the police because they said that she was acting strange. So when the police arrived, she bit them, and this same county courts ordered her to be committed to a mental health institution. She came back 3 different court hearings, 3 months, and they recommitted her. All of this has caused Mr. Hunter's son, his 16-year-old son, to have a mental breakdown. The extreme level of injustice that we have all experienced has been unbearable to us all, but with the long history of abuse that he has experienced at the hands of his mother and being confronted with yet another abuser, he had to be hospitalized. He's now doing much better and has been able to talk a lot and express feelings he's been harboring for years. He's very intelligent and completes his schoolwork without issue. I don't like any of the children having to endure this at the hands of any abuser, and I want nothing more than to separate them all from all of this. We have leased a home in Stillwater. The children were taken from their home school to be left with Crystal all day, every day, which she admits to that they're with her during the day in her application for a protective order against me. My son's phone screen time now shows that he's on YouTube Kids and using his phone for 8 hours a day. This is all they do. They've been taken from their home school, and they've They use their devices all day, and they don't go places and do fun things the way we always do, because Elijah works every day, all day, and this is all less about the well-being of the children and the best interest of the children for him, and more about emotional abuse on me. So he's not really in a position of capacity to understand the needs of the children. That outside of not doing the fun things that we always do, they're also not learning. My children have very bright futures, and taking them from their education for 6 months at a time is a tremendous constitutional violation. As the order states, Elijah would put them into school in the fall when they have been being educated, when they have not been being educated since he took them in December. This is very cruel. Crystal is not mentally stable. At this point, things have been done so backwardly and unstatutorily that I'm not sure what to do anymore. We have a great homeschool curriculum that the children love. We study the periodic table, atoms, and molecules. We study the Constitution, countries of the world, and we study Black History birthdays from a digital calendar that I made. Every day is someone's birthday in Black history. We have been stuck on aluminum number 13 since they were taken. We had a field trip to the city dump to talk to Jeff about aluminum and recycling, but we didn't get to go because they were taken. My 17-year-old was taken from boxing. Elijah keeps ruining everything for him and all of them. My son has since joined elite boxing in Stillwater, where he does boxing and Muay Thai. And how long will it be before Elijah rips that from him? He continually ruins their extracurricular activities. This case should jurisdictionally be in North Carolina because Elijah's probation is in North Carolina. He's still on probation. He's absconded probation. He has a warrant for his arrest for absconding probation in North Carolina. And he's only in Oklahoma to get out of probation, and he does not intend to return to North Carolina. There's on the DHS record, you can see that the worker interviewed his probation officer, who advised that he is in fact still on probation and that she is seeking to revoke his probation because he has absconded, which means that she would be advocating for him to go to jail. The case should be in North Carolina because we reside in North Carolina. We have been in Oklahoma thinking that we'd be here for 2 days to get the children and to be able to go back to North Carolina, and we have in fact been here for 6 months. First we're staying in hotels, and then we started staying in Airbnbs for longer stints, and now we have rented a place and we have reestablished ourselves in Stillwater, Oklahoma. We have left all of our things right where they were on December 2nd when the kids were taken. We dropped everything and we left, and our things are still sitting there. The domestic violence charges that are major to this case are in North Carolina. That's where they have the records of the domestic violence and can attest to the things that have happened. And the witnesses are also in North Carolina. Here is only his family, and nobody who advocates for me or the children are here. It's his family who just makes excuses for him, and they refuse to believe the things that he has done. So the case should be in North Carolina, but leaving the children in the care of Elijah and Crystal for me to return to North Carolina to continue the case is not something that I can live with. The children need protection from both of them. There are so many Oklahoma laws and statutes that work in the favor of victims such as myself and the children, and they were all violated in this order that this judge put out, which completely lacks subject matter jurisdiction. That order is a violation of mine and the children's constitutional rights. We have been deprived of life, liberty, and property off the concept that I might flee the domestic violence. She obviously has no concept of what it means to flee domestic violence. This deprivation to me is reminiscent of how they castrated George Washington Carver when he was 5 years old, off the idea that he might impregnate their daughter when he grew up. How does a person get this cruel and unusual punishment without committing a crime? I am familiar with narcissistic blame shifting, and I am not the focal point here. Elijah is the perpetrator. He has absconded probation and has a warrant for his arrest in North Carolina. He's been in constant abuse of his family. Had he chosen not to be an abuser, we would not be here. But for his actions, all based off choices not made by the children nor myself, but off choices he made. Not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7, but 8 instances of serious physical abuse. This outside of the constant everyday verbal and emotional abuse, the neglect. Whatever needs to happen to keep these kids safe is what needs to happen. If it weren't for Elijah and his choices, we wouldn't be here. There's more than enough evidence to show that he is a serial abuser who consistently takes the children across state lines to hide them from me, always with the stipulation of me getting back with him. This time I refuse to do that, and this is why we are here. Not only are they not safe with him, but they're being cared for by a woman who is clearly not of sound mind and body. Children were in a stable environment, but for his actions and kidnapping them, he has again ripped them away from that with his selfish demands. We all teach our kids, when we see something, say something. But Elijah has repeatedly punished my son for disclosing crystals hitting them. His phone was taken for that, and he never got it back. Also, when he thought my son told me where they lived, which he didn't, but I had tracking on my son's phone, my son said he locked him in a room when it was light outside and did not let him out till the next day. I really don't like disclosing anything the children have told me because Elijah has consistently shown that he retaliates against the children for any form of disclosure of abuse, and they have been through enough already.